For reaction on this, I'm joined by Dr. Telela Ngatane-Vika from the Wits School of Governance. A very good afternoon, Doc. Thank you very much for your time. Let's begin perhaps with the appointment of Ebrahim Rasool as the South Africa's ambassador to the United States on the back, of course, of the recent election of Donald Trump as the president of that country.
Yes, good afternoon, Rio, and all the viewers of Newzroom Afrika. I wouldn't say that it's a surprising appointment, given the fact that Rasool was once there, and given the the political dynamics that may ensue at the backdrop of President Trump's re-election. You need a steady hand, experienced hand, especially a hand that has been there, because who knows, the United States as foreign policy may take a turn. I don't know. I don't want to say for the worst, but we're waiting to see. But at least there are indicators that President Trump will continue with the America First approach to foreign policy.
Is it fair to say, as some people have suggested, that Pretoria is now has already been walking a tightrope on U.S. relations, and with Donald Trump now being going to be the head of state, bets are off?
Yes, I mean, I don't think they've got, Pretoria has got no other option but to walk that thin line. Geopolitics in their nature view and the viewers are quite messy, and they depend largely who's in office, especially the superpowers like the United States. So, of course, it was invariable that they would want to sort of be careful in how they approach issues from a South African point of view, especially with a perceived to be very antagonistic, sometimes Donald Trump, especially towards Africa as a continent, and central to that is South Africa's foreign policy, and especially given the backdrop of the Middle East conflict, Gaza, and also what's happening in Russia, Ukraine. And given South Africa's position of non-alignment. So, yes, it's a tightrope and they have to walk it.
Doc, I'm going to ask you to hold your thoughts right there as Ambassador Ebrahim Rasool actually joins us now. Ambassador Designate, thank you very much for your time. What are your marching orders?
Look, my marching orders is to help heal the relationship between South Africa and the United States, to be present in Washington first off, and to fight for our interests while defending our values. And so that really is the confidence. I'm very happy to say that the President and the Minister Lamola has in me, and I had no choice but to accept it. And so I look forward to a daunting challenge.
How would you describe your relations now? Are they necessarily fractured on the back of the Ukraine situation, on the back of what is happening in the Middle East?
I think that it's a misunderstanding in the relationship. I think we may have been talking past each other, or we may not have been communicating and engaging each other as partners should. And I think that that is an eminently correctable position, because we are aligned on major values. We are aligned on mutual interests. And I really think that we have just not been present enough to explain ourselves, and we may not have been able enough to communicate complex position in a very complex geopolitical situation that we find ourselves in.
Well, I mean, you recall that months ago there were tensions, around the USSA Bill, which brought forward or suggested to those onlookers that America is going to take an even harder stance going forward, especially after the election of Donald Trump. Do you think that's necessarily, it's a fair appraisal of the situation?
I think that we've had, if I could call it that, a rescue mission by Ministers Lamola and Parks Tau. I think we've opened up lines of communication, again, which is good. I'm not saying we're out of the woods, but I do believe that it needs consolidation. So mine is to build on that consolidation, and mine is certainly to build on the conversation that President Cyril Ramaphosa has had over the weekend with President-elect Donald Trump. So I see myself as, in part, being an explainer-in-chief. I see myself, in part, as reorienting the relationship to one of economic diplomacy, because I think that that's where our interests are most aligned. And I see myself as speaking into the very kind of transactional nature that I know is part of the DNA of President-elect Donald Trump. And I think that in a transactional nature of his DNA, I think South Africa and the United States will find each other and will bridge, after hard engagements, will bridge the kind of period of disrepair and threat that you spoke about.
What would you say you learned from your last stint there, that which is going to put you in good stead? In other words, that would have prepared you for this second stint?
I think that what has prepared me was my ability at that time to work both sides of the aisle, not to be carried away by who's in power, but to understand that power shifts very easily and very quickly in the United States. One time you could be putting all your money on the Democrats, another time you're confronting a House that is dominated by Republicans, and therefore you never foreclose on anything politically. Secondly, I think that there is a lot of goodwill, ordinary Americans who understand South Africa as a moral superpower because they grew up on the anti-apartheid struggle as the successor to the civil rights struggle, the Vietnam War, etc. South Africa is very large in their imagination, and so we've got to build that kind of rapport with American society. I think it's the ability to work the various think tanks, the universities, the business councils that are abundant, not only in Washington, but across the USA. And I think it is also to appeal to working class Americans that what is imported from South Africa is not a threat to their well-being, but it is an act of goodwill and solidarity with working people in South Africa as well.
I know this is, bordering on speculation. What do you think is going to be President Trump's attitude towards both the Ukraine issue, but also what's happening in the Middle East?
I think his own appetite for war and conflict is much less than his predecessors. I think his ability to transact a deal is more interest-based than a mythical value of defeat of this empire or that empire. I think he may act in relation to what is in front of him and not necessarily in drawing on deep histories to sustain conflicts. So my prognosis is that that is something that we can be appealing to. I think it is something that should be the basis of us getting onto the agenda, the continuation of the African Growth and Opportunities Act, getting onto the agenda, the continued good investment relationship that we have with the United States, and to be able to communicate that that speaks about an enduring relationship, partnership between South Africa and the US, rather than the small differences that may divide us.
Would bringing Donald Trump to South Africa for the G20 top your to-do list as well?
That is the invitation that the president over the weekend extended to him. That is one that I will concretize, and I will be able to say that we want to ensure a continuity and a good transition once South Africa in a year's time, once our term as president of the G20 is finished and we have to hand over to the United States, to him, very likely, then I think we want to hand him one in which there is relative partnership between the global South and the global North based on development, on well-being, and repairing the fractures in the geopolitical system of the world.
Ambassador, let me leave it there for now. Thank you very much. Really appreciate your time. Well, let's go back to Dr. Telela Nqedane-Vika. Doc, you heard what the ambassador-designate had to say. He's up to the task. He reckons he's much better prepared now, second time around.
Yes. I mean, he said very critical things, one explainer in chief, and that would land very well with the person of the president of Donald Trump, and also how experienced and a steady hand is Rasool has been. He also has got this ability to lower temperatures. You also need that kind of an ambassador in the United States, especially in an era where there may be some volatility in terms of the relationships, and especially on perhaps the Gaza matter. I see some, but he said something very, very profound, that it would seem President Trump doesn't have the same appetite, but we will be watching and see if that would turn out to be that case, because all of us would love to live in a world where there are no wars. That would be nice to achieve. So I think his steady pair of hands for South Africa, his experience in global politics, his experience in the United States, I think that's very, very important to underscore. So we wish him well.
Do you think, though, I mean, we have done, or how well do you think we have done on the international front, especially in the past few months that the Government of National Unity has been in existence? Do you think we're going to be able to reclaim our place under the sun?
Those days of glory, Aziz Fahad's days, when we're really known for the astuteness of foreign policy and how we responded with savviness. Well, if I were to be direct, the past few months are still very muddy, Vuyo and the viewers. And the reason why they're still operating in uncertainty, it's because the very GNU is a unity of parties from various ideological positions, and by that they come from different foreign policy positions. I mean, the DA, for instance, has got a different stance, especially on the Gaza matter and others. So I think that GNU space is still finding itself, and you can see how they disagree, or the different postures publicly in the public discourse. It is really reflective of that. I'm not certain they've found each other yet. They may not even find each other at any given time, but it's give and take, it's moving, it's not moving. But the core pillars of the South African foreign policy has always been non-alignment, which is based on the United Nations, the Charter of the United Nations, but how that gets to be expressed then varies, given like the stance in the Ukraine, like the stance in Gaza. So it's still muddy water.